Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. I'm Asbed Bedrossian, and along with Hovik Manucharyan, this week we're going to talk about the following major topics: continued tensions on the border, latest IRI and MPG polls on the Armenian elections,
and a little bit about the elections.
And to talk about these issues, we have with us Hrant Mikaelian, who is a political scientist and multidisciplinary researcher in social sciences based in Yerevan. He's also a senior researcher at the Caucasus Institute. And George Tabakyan, who is co-founder of Repat Armenia Foundation, Sahman NGO, and executive director at RR Foundation, which works mainly on projects with the armed forces of the Republic of Armenia. Hello and welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
All right. So the tense situation on the eastern borders of Syunik and Geghar-Kunik did not abate this week. Instead, it seems that Azerbaijan is intent on holding every inch of land inside Armenian territory, if not move forward even more. Analyst Edgar El-Bakian published a map of Azerbaijani positions which indicates that along the entire 24-kilometer border they have entrenched themselves approximately 3 kilometers inside Armenian territory. George, you visited the borders recently, I believe, and you do that frequently. Would you tell us what you're seeing over there firsthand? What can you tell us?
Okay, so before telling you what's going on there, let me start by shortly describing what happened in the past 2 weeks. So Azerbaijan basically violated the border which was used as demarcation, the 1974 Soviet maps, and we discussed this issue with you guys several times here. So basically, in many places, the Azerbaijani forces, they just advanced 3 to 4 kilometers. We're talking about the new borders between Armenia and Azerbaijan, Vardenis region and Syunik region. The situation is very tense, actually. The villagers are mobilized. After the war, the weapons were collected. Now they are redistributed again. And each village has formed self-defense units, which are in collaboration with the army. They are trying to, protect the border. Unfortunately, this border for the past 6-7 months, there was no proper engineering infrastructure, for protection, because the government was saying that the war is over and we don't need all these kinds of the engineering structures that we have in Tavush and in Nakhichevan and in Geghar-Kunik. So we had this simple shelters or even tents where soldiers were sitting and conducting monitoring of the border. And that's why it was easy for the Azerbaijanis to just move forward. Now some work is done, but very partial work, and the villagers in many places like Khoznavar, Khenadzakh, Vagadur, Der and Khensoresk, basically they revived all these old groups, the self-defense groups, and together with the armed forces they are trying to protect the border. Unfortunately, since the government is not doing anything, we have seen several organizations fundraising for the border. Apart from our organization, RR, there are at least 3 other groups which are fundraising, for new structures and new defense units for the border. So, if we summarize, it's the same situation as the Artsakh war. The army is left alone with the people to protect the country and the border.
Hrant, you mentioned something about 1974 maps. I know when we were talking about this previously, it wasn't entirely clear on what maps they were using. But are you saying that even though they're not announcing it, they are implicitly using the 1974 maps as a basis for demarcation, and that even though that was the case, they still violated those maps or the agreement based on those maps?
In reality, there is no issue with the maps, because 1974 maps are those maps that we can see, for example, on Google Earth or other main services. And also you can download the geography service, which is using Soviet General Staff maps, which are called the 1974 maps. So there is no question about where the 1974 border is passing. The issue is another. First, why should we take this border as a main line? And second question is, does Azerbaijan recognize these borders, and what does it do? In reality, Azerbaijan took under notion that it was only Armenia violated territorial integrity. Azerbaijan took everything it could from Artsakh, and Armenia was not doing anything, and it should be said that majority of Armenian population accepted it factually, and Pashinyan did a lot to let it happen. But another thing is when Azerbaijan got everything it wanted, it started thinking, well, until we can do something else, let's grab more. First of all, to gain more negotiation positions, and they say, okay, Armenia has occupied our territories a long time, now let us occupy Armenian territories. So I think they take these territories, first of all, because they can, and this is something we should understand. Azerbaijan, if we analyze all their official and semi-official statements, never recognized that it's going to have good relations with Armenia. Rather, it was stating, its official were stating that they need to defeat Armenia or even destroy the Armenian state. And they were also saying that Karabakh is not their enemy, that their enemy is Armenian nation. This is what they were saying. And that's why they are taking as much as possible. This is first thing. And another thing is that they take as much territories as possible to gain negotiation position, because they want to gain also territories in the northeast of Armenia, where the borderline is not fully corresponding to what we see in the maps. They also want to have one-sided concessions from Armenian side there as well. And as we can see, Pashinyan, based on his statements, is either ready to sign and to concede territories there as well, or already did it. So I think this is here we stand as of now.
Pashinyan indicated that he is intent on signing this document to move forward with the demarcation and delimitation process. He's saying that he does not want to, that it'll take a long time, but that they should start with the process. But I wanted to ask you, is it logically possible to do demarcation and delimitation and accept, it implies on recognizing the borders of Azerbaijan. And when you do that, is it possible to do that and not also recognize Artsakh as part of Azerbaijan? I just don't know sort of where the end goal of this is going to be.
He did not only say that he's going to sign the text as a document. He also said, he did it 2 days ago, that it does not matter where the border is passing. That's what he said. And he also made several other ridiculous statements, which clearly indicate that this man is not going to keep any piece of Armenian territory under Armenia's control. So he is not going to do anything. I think this is one thing which we should clearly understand. And until he is in power, Armenia's territorial integrity is under very big threat. Now, concerning second part of your question, it was on recognizing Artsakh within borders of Azerbaijan. Well, primary goal of Azerbaijan is to fix some more gains here in Gerarkunik, in Syunik, and in Tavush. So this is primary goal. Another goal is to get the corridor through Armenian territory. And the third goal is to get fully recognized Artsakh within its borders. And the issue of recognition of Artsakh within borders of Azerbaijan is again issue of negotiations. Because what Azerbaijani officials say, they say, you know what, one day we might have a police operation which will end this Nagorno-Karabakh regime there. This is what they say. And of course, it does not work exactly this way. But what really is important is that not only international law matters, but also the force on the ground. And based on who is, let's say, dominant on the ground, you can say who will be interpreting laws, the agreements, and so on. Technically, you can have this border recognition with Azerbaijan and still be negotiating about Artsakh, because Artsakh is about nation self-determination. But in fact, if you recognize Azerbaijan's border, first you recognize the occupation of Artsakh territories, which have been called the liberated lands, or Azerbaijan was calling it occupied lands, and then we are under big threat of losing the rest third of Artsakh. So again, it depends on the force, but since force is on Azerbaijani side, I think it might mean that we will lose even the rest of Artsakh.
So this week we had another 6 soldiers captured by Azerbaijan under very concerning circumstances, but I don't want to go into it because it's been covered a lot in the media. We also had one death. But what's interesting that is the geopolitical developments around this. So, for instance, on Thursday, Nikol Pashinyan proposed that both Armenia and Azerbaijan should pull their armed forces back to positions inside their countries, and that either Russian or US or French international observers be positioned along the de facto border in order to keep the peace and allow for the delimitation and demarcation. I mean, you can't see us rolling our eyes, but this is where we'd play the laugh track if we had one. George, in all seriousness, do you think it's even possible? I'm sure if you ask some Western country to come to the region and set up, boots on the ground, they would. But for instance, would Azerbaijan or even Russia agree to this?
Well, I mean, first of all, this request in itself is very absurd because the main point of it is to show that the Armenian army is very weak and is incapable. I mean, this is the same leader who has denied the army to defend it. It's very weird because the same army which is in Tavush and in Nakhichevan, they have orders to shoot if any Azerbaijani soldier approaches their military posts. But in Gegharkunik and Sisyan, the army doesn't have any order to shoot. And this is why we had 6 hostages a couple of days ago. Now, this is the main purpose, I think. The second purpose is, this is anti-Russian actually. The Russians will never like it to have Western soldiers here in Armenia. And this government, since the end of the war, has been having a very clear anti-Russian propaganda. They started blaming the Russians for losing the war, and then they started blaming the Russians for every deed. And recently, in the past 2 weeks, we can see through the fake media and the secondary media outlets which are close to the government and Pashinyan, they are basically blaming the Russians for not protecting the Armenian borders. Again, another absurd thing. The army is not defending, the country is not defending itself, but still we are ready to blame the Russians for not defending our own country. Now, as for Azerbaijan, I highly doubt that they will accept this purpose because Azerbaijan is solving another problem. Before the 12th of May, the border was more or less, it was quiet, and I think the Azerbaijanis were waiting for the elections to be over so that whatever is promised by Nikol can be realized. Mainly, we're talking about the demarcation process in Tavush and Nakhichevan, the enclaves that we have talked about. So this was supposed to be done after the elections. But apparently, or this is my opinion actually, the Azerbaijanis, they are understanding that there is a chance that Pashinyan will not be re-elected. So now they are trying to push the agenda and push things forward. So that's why they occupied all this territory. And through this occupation, they are solving a couple of problems, a couple of issues actually. Now they have a security zone in that area, exactly like Turkey did in Syria. Turkey, for the time in March 2018, they have a security zone in the northern part of Syria. It's like it's more than, I think, 4 to 10 kilometers. So this is protection of its villages which are on the border, as the Syrian army is very far from its borders. So Azerbaijan is doing the same. In the future, if they bring villagers to these regions, they will be very secure because they are far from the border. The second thing, all these mountainous areas that Azerbaijan took, including the Black Lake region, they are the water sources of Armenia. So controlling the water sources is very important thing for Azerbaijan because, as you know, most of the water of Azerbaijan and Nakhichevan goes to Armenia, in Tavush, in Gegharkunik, in Artsakh with the Sarsank reservoir, and in Nakhichevan through Areni. So, for example, the Black Lake is the water source of a couple of villages of Goris. And now, since it's under their control, anytime they can change the path and the water can flow to their region. So since they have advanced in our territory and they have the high hand here, I highly doubt they will accept any international troops here.
Interestingly, this strategy is similar to Turkey, right? Controlling the water for Iraq and Syria.
Yeah, so I mean, people learn from the from their deeds, except I mean, not us actually. So this is what Azerbaijanis are doing. And the Black Lake region, which is the Ishkhanasar mountain, there they have a couple of issues which are solved right now. Other than the water resource, they are very close to Goris Rapan main road, which is our main road, which goes to Iran and which goes to Artsakh. This is the same road which is used by the Russians for catering their troops in Artsakh. So this road now is under their monitoring. With their advance, the 3.5-4 kilometers in our region, they are much closer now to the new base, the Russian base, which is in Sisyan airport. As you know, the Russians, they have a base there. They use that the Sisyan airport for transportation. And finally, which is our worst nightmare actually, if it turns true. With the advance of the Black Lake region, they are closer to Ankeragot. If you look at the map, that's the only road which they can connect Azerbaijan to Nakhichevan through a village called Shagab. It's a border village on Nakhichevan. So if they are very close for that region as well. So if Meghri didn't happen, it will take them a couple of hours to reach to Nakhichevan. So with this movement, the Azerbaijanis, they are not sure that Nigol will be re-elected, so they are trying to solve their own problems with their own agenda.
Interesting. Let's monitor the situation. We'll come back to it next week. I wanted to go to the other items on our agenda today. So 2 new polls were released this week, one by IRI and another by MPG Gallup Armenia. Both polls are relevant to the current electoral campaigns, but they also, especially the IRI poll, make attempts to gauge the general mood of the population on other matters such as emigration, sentiment towards COVID, and so forth. So let's begin with the less exciting but equally important questions. On emigration, for instance, the IRI poll asked respondents, if possible, would you leave for another country to live there permanently? They asked a similar question early in February, so it's interesting to compare. 17% said yes, another 5% said somewhat yes, for a total of 22%. Hrant, what do you think of this finding? How does it compare with previous IRI polls, which was, the latest one was on February? I think the way they phrased it in the February poll was, do you see a future for your family in Armenia over the next 1 to 4 years? But I think they can be considered equal questions. What are your thoughts?
Well, in reality, these questions are not completely equal. They address to more or less same set of issues, but it's not completely equal because seeing future is one thing, trying to emigrate is another thing, because the second one includes action. Now, what did change? I can say that this 17 plus 5% is more than we used to have like 1 or 2 years ago, but it's not very dramatic increase, which is also needed to say. I think it's not yet very bad indicator because we used to have even bigger figures on immigration, and I assume it might still grow, and it also already could grow because unfortunately IRI poll, when it was already published, it was outdated. The field work was done in between 8th of April and 4th of May. So it's already in average 1.5 months outdated, and I think that Gerharkunik and Sunik events have affected Armenian public opinion hardly.
All right, let's move on to the next question that was interesting to me. The IRI poll asked respondents, how satisfied are you with the work of the following state bodies? And they listed various institutions. Looking at the results of this question is interesting, especially because there's also a similar question in the February poll. Just for background, the February poll was, please tell us your opinion about the work of each of these institutions. Across the board, this time, there seems to be a drop in favorability ratings for all institutions in the latest polls. And it seems to suggest that all institutions have nearly equal ratings, especially when you consider the margin of error. So essentially, 10% say all institutions, they're very satisfied with all institutions. Another 30% say that they're somewhat satisfied. And then, it goes on. But it didn't used to be this way. So in the February polls, there was clear differentiation between institutions. For instance, the Army 50% had a very favorable rating in the army. So I'm not sure, Hrant, is there something wrong with the way they asked the question, or is this indicate maybe we've crossed the threshold of universal apathy and lack of trust in all institutions? What is your take on this specific question from the IRI poll?
I think it's more second, because what we can see is very subverted field. We never could see that all institutions have equal trust rate, and also we have never seen that about 1/4 of people who were asked did not have any opinion on institutions. Also, it's suspicious that only some selected institutions were included in this list, and I'm more than sure that much bigger list was asked, and only some were presented here. So the issue is that, first of all, we don't see full picture. We see only the picture which IRI presented, and this is important to note, because I will go to this back when we will be discussing the party approval rates. And then the second thing is what we can see is that field that there is very low variance between institutions, which means there is no more talk about institutions anymore. It's only talk about the system. And even president office is perceived as part of the system. So now we are dealing with the system. We don't deal with any of the specific institutions. That's why we see very close numbers concerning all institutions. And you're right, Army and Church would have high approval rates for a very long time in Armenia, generally since 1991. So what we see now is a very big difference from all of that.
And it's very interesting that, as you mentioned, the church is missing from the May results, indicating does this mean that they didn't ask, or there weren't enough responses for them to tabulate an answer? What is your thought?
My thought is that church got a bigger approval rate than those institutions which were included in the list, and that's why they did not present it.
Interesting.
It's by far not the first time IRI does this.
Right, yeah. We talked about it last time as well. Emil Sanamian raised some questions about, I think they didn't ask any questions about Robert Kocharian when they were asking about different political candidates. But yeah, this is interesting.
Again, they did not include it.
Yeah.
They did not include it in the report. It doesn't mean they did not ask.
You do not ask questions for which you don't want to hear answers, right?
Well,
yeah, you might ask, but not include in the report.
Yeah,
that's
so
also you can do.
Hrant is suggesting the latter, actually. Anyway, obviously, along with everything, the army score essentially tanked. Previously, it was the army had 73% favorability. In the May poll, it's basically a baseline, which is like 10% saying, or about 12% saying that they trust the army very much, or have a very favorable rating, and another 27% saying they have somewhat favorable. George, I mean, obviously with the passivity of Armenia's armed forces, this seems to be an obvious explanation for the poll results, but do you have any other explanation that is not so obvious? I think we're forced to ask, but I don't know what answer you can give us.
We need to keep in mind that Armenia is a country which has been in continuous wars. Every third person in Armenia is related to the army. This is a very concrete statistics which the army did a couple of years ago. So each third person in Armenia is connected in a way with the army, and it's pity what we are seeing now with the polls. But I would like to remind you that in November 2019. There were some polls, I think, sponsored by the government. The army had 91% of the trust of the population. This is November 2019. And it's very pity what we are seeing right now. The reasons are different, but I strongly believe that there is a very organized, methodic struggle against the army by the government itself. We saw what the government did with the officers and the generals and the general media. What was done against the army and the generals and all those who contributed in the Artsakh war. Then the war came, and after the war, we have around 1,500 criminal cases against army officers.
Mm-hmm.
Then we remember what happened in February with the general staff at their request for the Prime Minister's resignation, and then all of them, they were dismissed. So all these things brought to these figures. And there is some sense of frustration by a certain number of people because they thought that whatever they couldn't do on the streets of Yerevan, they were hoping that the army will take over and continue that work, which never happened. So it's pity the numbers what we are seeing, but I think it's the normal outcome of the work done by the government for the past 3 years.
Okay.
Well, one of the things that I saw on the poll slide, Hovik, was that they were saying army leadership. Was that the same as last time? Was it army last time, or was it army leadership?
That's another interesting catch. Yes, it's this time it's army leadership, but they're both armed forces and army leadership, and they're both equal in terms of ratings, which is interesting. The last time there was only army.
Right.
Like I'm in technology, and if I saw like a result like this, I would say there's some bug in your code, but obviously there's no bug. It's basically like all the questions are standard flat line questions. There's a certain segment of the population that's always going to answer very satisfied, and some are going to say somewhat satisfied. But essentially, I think this is like equal to this lack of variance is. I think what Hrant said, it's indicative of complete apathy in any institution.
To me, the presentation of the results seems somewhat political. I mean, who thinks about the army versus the army leadership? It seems like we should have one army here that is supposed to defend the country, but over the last 2-3 years, with all the changes and everything, it seems like there's an army that's not even allowed to defend the country by the leadership. I would say that's the government leadership, but they put army leadership to separate, to give the government a buffer from the perceived failure of the armed forces, because I don't think the armed forces themselves are really failing.
Well, I think if you remember what was going on around that time, I think especially probably when they planned these questions, there was still a question of the army leadership rising up. They probably planned this sometime around March or even February. They obviously wanted to find out if there was a difference between the army leadership versus the army. Unfortunately, it seems like people couldn't care less at all.
Let me have a small comment there. I think the separation army and army leadership is done on purpose. I mean, these things don't happen by mistake, and this is exactly what Nigol's people did, not only for the past 3 years, but the past even 5 and 6 years. They always separated, saying that good soldiers, but we have corrupted and bad leadership and generals. So this was always there even in 2016. If you remember, the focus was that the 18 to 20 years old, the soldiers, they fought, but the generals were, they are in corruption, and they flew off and take off and all that. So this is done on purpose, and just to show to highlight this separation, unfortunately.
Let me jump in for a second. I think there is one more reason for that. I think that the army is now unable to fulfill its functions. So if ever before we knew that army is protecting the borders, army is doing its job, we could never assume that army can be defeated like this, and it would never be defeated like this, and it could never be retreating without any shoot. Azerbaijan could not take like 100 meters without major clash. And another interesting point is that after the February-March events regarding the general staff, we got very bad appointments there. For example, we have head of general staff Artak Davtyan, who was considered by this government, by the Commission on April War, a person who has very big guilt in the problems which took place in the April War. Another person is Arshak Karapetyan, who is vice head of general staff, who is again considered as one of persons who is guilt for mistakes which took place in April War, especially in surveillance and intelligence. So the problem is that we got very bad appointments on top level as well, because, for example, Bagarshak Harutyunyan, what is he doing, for example, to to reconstruct the army institution or the general staff? So we have very poor, let's say, level of governance of army as well, and this is also obvious to everyone.
Just to continue on what Hrant is saying, I perfectly agree with him. The only hope of the army after the war, especially when the minister resigned, was the general staff. I mean, these were the generals who participated in the war, and there was big hope on them to carry on the reforms and to stand up. And once they were dismissed, or before their dismissal, once the new minister was appointed with his deputies who were never in any security apparatus, nothing related to the army, people started getting frustrated that nothing will change, or even the army will not be able to stand up. And when the general staff was dismissed and this new general staff was appointed along with his deputy, people, I think, many people right now who work with the army, they don't have hopes in the leadership.
Let's move on to the election-related questions. So, before moving on to the question on political parties and politicians, I just want to state that both the IRI and MPG polls seem to indicate a high level of interest in participation. Around 70% of people saying they either definitely or probably will participate. So now moving on to the question of politicians and political parties. We have 4 months of data from MPG on political parties, specifically related to the upcoming elections. According to the latest one, which was issued just last week, from conducted May 24 to 28, the top 5 parties or alliances are Civil Contract with 22.9%, highest on Dashing, 17.5%, Prosperous Armenia at 3.8%, Hana Petition, which seemed to have gotten us some bump recently at 2.8%, and the last one, the fifth one, being Pativunem, which is 2.7%. Hrant, based on the results we have today, I wanted to ask, which parties and alliances do you think have a chance to clear the threshold, which is 5% for political parties and 7% for alliances in the upcoming elections?
Let me start with participation rate. About 75% say that they are going to participate in the elections, which seems to be high, but it's not that high in reality. Of course, some people say they will participate and they don't participate. And if you ask, for example, people, are they volunteering to help someone, or did they go to cinema, or did they pray or something, you will always get the exaggerated results. In reality, when you ask people, did they do anything, they always overestimate their participation rate. So 75% of people saying that they are going to participate does not mean that 75% of people will participate.
Yeah, I was saying, but can we infer some number from that, or can we derive some other number from that 75% that we're pretty sure that will participate?
We can try to compare it to previous election polls. In 2017, 92 point something percent of people were saying they are going to participate, and in snap elections which took place in 2018, about 90% say they are going to participate. So if we compare to those elections, we can see that now the participation rate is expected to be lower than used to be there then. And also what is more important, I think, is that we see more or less strong opposition to participation in these elections. If I'm not mistaken, 14 point something percent of people say they definitely will not participate, and some 11 point something probably will not participate. So, and in reality, if we want to get the real numbers, we also should count with those the people who probably will participate, but generally these people also don't participate. So, what I want to say is that 75% seems to be high, but in reality it indicates that the interest in elections is low, or there is some portion of population which is going to boycott the elections, which is even closer to reality.
Hrant, in the previous election, when the predicted turnout was 92%, do you remember what the eventual actual voter turnout turned out to be?
Yeah, in 2018 there were 90% of people who who said they are going to participate, out of which, if I'm not mistaken, maybe about 70% said they are definitely going to participate. Official turnout rate was 43.6%. 43, so just half of those who have declared they are going to participate. But if we outmeet of that number, the people of the base of electors, the people who are in reality not in Armenia, who have emigrated but still are on the voter lists, because voter lists include about 600,000 people who are not in Armenia at the moment, and the same comes to this time as well. So if we exclude these people, the real participation rate was around 62.5%, which means that with these numbers which we have now, we are probably going to have around like 38% of official turnout rate, and unofficially, if we outmeet people who are not in Armenia, about 58% or 57% or something. So this is the picture, but also one thing which is to be noted is that if we compare it to the polls which were conducted in February, in March and in April, the number of people who are going to participate has grown. So maybe it will again grow a little, not much, but maybe it will grow a little before the elections.
So maybe you are thinking it's going to be in the 40s.
Yeah, maybe it will be 40, like something.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, how about which alliances have a chance to succeed in the elections?
Yeah, concerning the percentage which parties and alliances might take, this is first time within these 3 years when we have very clear competition. First time, I mean the end of May. Because before that, Pashinyan would always be a leader, and there was no one who was behind and enough close to be compared with. So you could have Pashinyan's result like 50%, and the next party would have like 5 or 7%. These are numbers from like pre-war situation, and even after the war, Pashinyan's approval rate started declining, and it did not stop declining yet. So I think this is a process. It was declining all the time since November 9, and it did not stop. Same comes to his electoral rank. So now he has already 23%. He has declined by 2% only in 1 week. The next is Kocheryan's alliance Armenia, which has about 17.5%. And this is again significant growth, around 3.2% within 1 week. So this shows a clear trend, and it's not the first time this trend can be observed. We can observe this trend generally since the end of the war, but in the beginning it was slow, and now it's getting faster and faster. And we see Kocheryan growing and Pashinyan declining, so it's first time we can assume that Kocheryan might overpass Pashinyan on elections. Every day we see that this is becoming more and more likely. This is first thing which we should mention. Second thing is that second issue is which minoritarian parties are going to pass. It's of course, and of course it should be mentioned that there are two subjects, main subjects which will fight for the power, and all of the rest powers are much weaker, much weaker. Now, about minoritarian parties, more or less we can be certain about Prosperous Armenia, which is going to take around 7%. And also, when we are talking about 23% for Pashinyan and 17.5% for Kocheryan, which we have now, we should mention that about 40% or something said they are not going to vote for any of the parties, or they did not say for whom they are going to vote. And this is important because at least before end of April, I can say for sure that those who were inclined to support oppositions, they would be more inclined to not disclose their favorite party. So I think if we recount it after the elections, it might also affect the election result, because some people don't say whom they trust.
Yeah, that is a large group of undecided. You're right.
Yeah, we don't know how they will behave. If we assume that they are going to vote the very same way as people who disclosed their favorite parties, then we get, as of now, we get 39% for Pashinyan and 30% for Kocheryan. But as I said, the landscape is changing quickly, so we cannot be sure about what we are going to have in 3 weeks. Now, concerning minoritarian parties, it's Prosperous Armenia, which is going to take around 7% of votes, and it's very slowly but decreasing, and I assume it's losing its votes into 3 directions. Some might start supporting Pashinyan, because Prosperous Armenia's electorate and Pashinyan's electorate as of now is very similar. We have data for that. Some might start supporting Kocheryan because there are some segments of Prosperous Armenia's electorate is similar to Kocheryan's electorate as well. And some might go into undecided or into the category of people who are not going to vote at all. So Prosperous Armenia's approval rate is very slowly but declining, and this is also a rather long process. And as I said, since approval of whole system is declining, whole institutions, Prosperous Armenia, as part of this system, let's say nominal opposition, but still part of the system, is also losing. And it's interesting how it will behave if there is a power change. Now, another party which is rather unexpected, which is Հանրապետություն Party or Republic Party by Aram Sargsyan. I can say that this party lately, I've been observing that it started getting support from suspicious medias like Perfect TV, and also it has a very intense electoral campaign, and I see its approval rate is growing. As of now, it can expect up to 5% of votes, and it's growing because of some people who are losing their trust in Pashinyan are inclined to vote for Հանրապետություն Party or for Babajanyan-Shirinyan alliance. So this party might overpass the threshold, and it's very likely that it will overpass, although not fully decided yet.
Is it an election strategy to try and steal votes from Hayastan Dashing and Zarugyan?
No, I think it will get more votes from Pashinyan. In reality, it's getting Pashinyan's votes.
Interesting.
I think it's an insurance policy.
Yeah, if it will enter the parliament, it might form a coalition with Pashinyan. So in reality, this is kind of party which is not Pashinyan but is like Pashinyan. So if you are not trusting Pashinyan himself but still want his policy to be continued, you might vote for this party. And so that's why if Pashinyan is losing like 2% a week, then let's say quarter of it or maybe half of it this party might be getting. So this party is increasing its presence. Also, it's still minoritarian, but it has good chances to pass to the parliament. And then there is a Republican Party and the Homeland Party alliance named I Have a Honor or something, Pativunem. So this alliance, here I have a couple of things to say. First of all, I'm not sure that Հանրապետական or Republican Party got something from this alliance. I'm not sure really. But anyway, this alliance can get 5% of votes, but unfortunately for them, they need to get 7%. So Republican Party might face very similar situation to what they faced in 2018 when they were very close to threshold but did not pass it. And now they might still get 5% or close to 5%, but still not pass because their threshold is 7%. It's important how they will campaign, but also it's interesting that I have seen an article by, if I'm not mistaken, Meher Aslanyan, who was stating, based on the recent polls, that this alliance might be a game changer, because if it's passing, if Pativunem alliance is passing to the parliament, this means that Kocheryan might form a coalition, and if it's not, it might mean that Pashinyan will form a coalition. So even in this situation, a minoritarian party might still play a big role, and also if any minoritarian party which might support Pashinyan also will get to the parliament, it also might change, I think. So I think it's very important to follow this story, to follow Pativunem bloc. and how it will behave, and is it going to overpass threshold or no.
George, I'd like to take a slightly different perspective on dissecting what is going on in the elections. What do the elections look like for people in Sunik, regardless of what party affiliation they are in?
Shortly, because Hrant gave a very interesting and detailed explanation. First of all, we're still assuming that the elections will take place. I am one of the rare people who still say that the elections will be postponed. I'm still on my opinion, and in the coming weeks, we will know what will happen. Secondly, and here Hrant can confirm, these latest polls of MPG, they only questioned 1,000 people, and their error was plus minus 3%. And they had info on the regions. I have a good friend in this sector, and he said that at least you need to talk to 2,500 people, the question, so you can get accurate results.
Mm-hmm.
So these results are very, for me, very questionable, although they are close to what we are seeing on ground. In Sunik, most of the people are opposition. Most of the people, you rarely find anybody pro-Nigol. There you have the top party there, which is the Reborn Party. This is the new party which was established in Sunik a couple of months ago.
Right.
Vahe Hagopian, he's the leader. And the second power there is Kocharian, and the third power there are the Dashnaks. And all these three have joined arms there. So Sunik will be like the opposition stronghold. As for the new minorities and who will get in, let's keep in mind, I think Hrant said as well the same, people are very high on emotions, and we have a large number of people who are not decided. And these people can be a game changer in the last minute or in the last weeks. So, for example, what happened in Gegharkunik and Sisyan, it directly affected on Nigol's rating. I think right now the mass voting for the Dashing, Hayastan Dashing, Kocharian's alliance, are solid. I think it will not go less. It will increase, but it cannot go less because people have decided. Unless Kocharian did a big mistake, which was very unexpected. So in the coming weeks, we will see what events will happen, and these events directly are affecting the questions and people's opinion. I would also have a small chance of a new movement called 5165. They appeared in the polls very, very quickly. Now they have around 0.5% of the votes. But again, because of the accuracy of the margin, I cannot say much about that. But this might be a movement which has some potential, especially if the elections are postponed.
Okay.
Hrant, the favorability rating question from MPG also had a breakdown based on urban and rural areas. And actually there, for instance, for Yerevan, for the city of Yerevan, which is the largest voter population in Armenia, the Hayastan Dashing is actually in the lead over a civil contract by 23.9% versus 16.9%. Hrant, do you think that these regional differences may actually affect the real results of the election that we're not seeing? For instance, do you as an analyst have actually more detailed breakdown of whether people in the regions are more motivated to go to vote and things like that maybe the rest of us don't see?
Yeah, you're right. In Yerevan, Hayastan Alliance has overpassed Pashinyan's party, but it's not only in Yerevan. It's also in provincial towns where a Hayastan Alliance has 19.4% and civil contract has 19.1%. So it's already in the towns where Hayastan Alliance has overpassed. So only rural areas are stronghold of Pashinyan, and which means that for him, first of all, it will be a bit hard to keep power long term, because he's let's say basing on provinces, but is very weak in the capital, which is very weak very weak position for any government. And also why it happens this way? It's because the information is more available in the city, and the, let's say, intensity of social contacts and social capital is higher in the cities, in the towns, than in villages. And also it's important that in Yerevan and in towns, within 1 month, Hayastan Alliance has increased its number of electors by 10 to 11%, while in villages the change is only 3%, and Pashinyan keeps his approval in villages high. Now, how it might affect? Usually in Armenia we had villages voting more intensively than Yerevan, and participation rate in Yerevan would always be lower than villages. In these elections, I'm not completely sure it will be this way. To be more exact, let's say if you would ask me 2 months ago, I would say yes, it will be the same way, because we would see that Pashinyan's electors are very motivated. At that time they were still very motivated. Now, I think it's less and less likely that they will vote, and I think that it might happen that they will abstain, some of them.
You mean the people from the villagers?
I mean the people from villages, and also all of Pashinyan's electors, because you know, how was his propaganda based? He was based, and he still tries to abuse it. For example, today or yesterday he said he has 60%, which is by far not true, but he is basing on the fact that he had a majority, and when majority is supporting, some people try to jump in to not be left outside, so they try to be part of this majority. Now in city and in towns, Pashinyan does not have majority anymore, so his support base is being lost. But in villages, he still has at least relative majority. This is why his approval there is more or less stable. But the day people will see that he does not have majority there as well, they will also abstain, and this might happen before the elections. So I think that the classic answer to your question would be that villagers and Pashinyan supporters would be more inclined to participate. But as of now, I can only say that I don't know, and it might go both ways.
Okay. Well, this was our show today. Thank you, George. Thank you, Hrant, for coming on, and thanks for the audience for listening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
That concludes our program for this Week in Review episode. We hope it has helped your understanding of some of the issues from the previous week. We look forward to your feedback and your suggestions for issues to cover in greater depth. Contact us on our website at groong.org, or on our Facebook page ANN-Groong, or in our Facebook group Groong-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Laura Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. On behalf of everyone in this episode, we wish you a good week. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, like our pages, and follow us on social media. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.